Can't believe I paid money for this. Boing. I pre-ordered Dark Souls 3 Collector's Edition, as you clearly saw from that horrible statue that I showed in the intro. It took 3 weeks after launch until I finally got it. Just another reason to avoid pre-ordering games. After Dark Souls 2, I basically lost the ability to get hyped for games, but it came back for Dark Souls 3 for one final hurrah. I was genuinely excited to play it, and for the first few areas I absolutely was. That feeling quickly faded and it all felt routine. Except this time around, I just can't give it a pass. This was meant to be the amalgamation of all your efforts throughout the Dark Souls series, and it all feels like a shoddy contractual obligation. This section includes spoilers, so skip to this timecode if you wish to avoid them. There really is no need for a Dark Souls 3 story summary. I'll leave that to a bunch of fucking YouTube channels that love that shit. Dark Souls 3 is the same shtick as Dark Souls 1 and 2. You're just a guy who's cursed and you can't die. This time, you just happen to wake up in a cemetery from bells as opposed to a prison or just kind of ending up in a forest. You need to seek souls again. This time you need to kill the Lords of Cinder to finally get to the first flame. You get to the first flame, and you make an arbitrary choice, and that's your story. My biggest issue with Dark Souls 3 is that Miyazaki said that this is the last Dark Souls game, at least for the foreseeable future. When you say that, and when it's meant to be the final game in the series, you don't give out this bullshit ending. I've watched all the other endings on YouTube. They're all the same drivel. Worthless. No closure. Left open to interpretation. Left open for more sequels. I was genuinely upset when that was the ending I got. The whole game, and Dark Souls 2 as well, feels like a shitty contractual obligation with no passion. They made a deal with Namco Bandai for 3 games, and that's exactly what we got. Uninspired and lazy games that ride the coattails of the first. This is going to apply to a lot of FromSoft Souls titles, but I genuinely think that the formula works best as an isolated, unique world. Demon Souls was a brand new world to explore, and it felt fantastic. It was amazing. Dark Souls was clearly designed as a one-off, and it feels like a complete story in itself. Bloodborne is also a one-off, and it feels complete, but it does feel a bit lacking in terms of a main story. I'll say right now, before everyone freaks out, I believe there's a distinct difference between story and world building. Bloodborne has amazing world building, but it has a shoddy story. I may not have made that clear when I talked about it in my review. It's been a while since I watched it. Dark Souls 2 and 3 have this thematic emphasis on cycles that wasn't really present in Dark Souls 1. It was slightly there, but it was something that they just ran with in Dark Souls 2 and 3. They are very derivative and reliant upon Dark Souls 1 for this to occur. This is the third game about breaking the cycle and the curse of the undead. You have no meaningful closure in Dark Souls 2 or 3. It all just repeats and resets. It even negatively retroactively impacts 1 because you know that what you do in the original is also meaningless. Demon Souls and Dark Souls had very complete stories. You had a goal and you achieved it throughout the course of the game. There was this second element of storytelling, which is the world building by talking to NPCs, reading item descriptions, interpretation of items, and where you found them. I'm gonna go ahead and start a rant here because this is something I've always hated about the Souls community. This lore and world building started a whole slew of garbage lore channels on YouTube and discussion. I want to believe that From just kind of shit the bed in terms of world building for Dark Souls 2 and 3, but the more likely scenario is that I just stopped giving a shit about it after Dark Souls 2. I have this overwhelming feeling though, and I'll put my tinfoil hat on for this, is that they saw people were making these insane theories about the world and lore, and they just said fuck it, and didn't bother fleshing things out. They made things ambiguous for the sake of ambiguity and to give fuel to these lore channels rather than to actually tell a complete and interesting story themselves. The whole series reeks of, it just works! There's no need to use anything because the flow of time is convoluted. It was cool twice, in Dark Souls and Demon Souls, but after 5 games, just tell me what the fuck is going on. From just always hits the reset button on every new game that comes out and throws all this unanswered shit out the window. They present you exactly the same story the next time with some new tidbits that just never get answered either. And that'll be the end of that rant. Back on track, a thematic emphasis on cycles is going to encourage repetition. It largely makes your achievements in the previous game null and void and bestows an overwhelming feeling of redundancy and deja vu throughout. It's not good when you're experiencing the same things over and over again. Dark Souls 3 is largely a new coat of paint on something we've played once, twice, 4 times before. A new coat of paint is not enough to justify playing a game. I'll give From the benefit of the doubt and say they probably weren't intentionally making things ambiguous, and after 5 games, they were just straight up out of ideas. After 4 games about knights and wizards, and 1 about eldritch horrors in less than 7 years, it's not surprising they're wearing themselves thin. Souls had become almost a Call of Duty level amount of turnaround, and that's really bad for your game development, and it's starting to show with From. One of the most effective strategies in Dark Souls 3 is just to grab a longsword and spam R1 until you're out of stamina. This was pretty good for me, because I always do my first playthrough using a longsword and a shield, just like I did in my first playthrough of Demon Souls. I usually supplement with a little bit of magic, miracles, or pyromancy depending on how I'm feeling. Honestly, Bloodborne is a lot like this as well, with spamming R1 with the saw cleaver being one of the optimum strategies. It's not particularly fun, and it really makes you question whether the combat system is even that enjoyable at all in Dark Souls 3. Boss fights and larger enemies do the same spamming of attacks to you. This turns the game into matches of you chain dodging followed by chain attacking until you're out of stamina. It may just be that I'm sick of it after 5 games and 2 sets of DLC. I haven't done the Dark Souls 2 or 3 DLCs. It would be nice if there was more diversity in your arsenal, but From is seen to gut magic, miracles, and pyromancy. Magic has always been problematic in the other Souls games, largely because it was by far and wide the most overpowered thing you could do, and it was very easy to execute on top of that. From has systematically nerfed Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 magic to the point where it is severely reduced in effectiveness. It's really dumb because From has always included various rings, headgear, and weapons that boost magic damage, but never offered the same to melee besides the Clever Rat's ring. So it was always overpowered. All they had to do was ditch those equipment modifiers and magic wouldn't be so damn broken, but they keep them all in for every single game, and they did it in this game, and they just nerfed magic into the ground. I don't understand why they did it. Anyways, I beat Dark Souls 3 by exclusively spamming R1 one-handed attacks. I used a quality build and I stuck with my starting longsword until the end of the game. I did a bit of grinding as preparation for a new game plus and I swapped to the Sunlight Straight Sword because I think it surpassed my longsword slightly after I hit like 40 dex, 40 strength, but I never did end up playing New Game Plus. If you've played Dark Souls before, you know what to do. Kill what you see early on to get levels, explore for resources and secrets, bonfire hop, level up, meet NPCs, try to complete their quest lines, and learn from your mistakes. One of the only things that From introduced new to Dark Souls 3 is weapon arts. Weapon arts are touted as this fantastic new system that give you special moves for your weapons. Most of it is completely worthless, mainly due to limitations of the stance system. Weapon arts really only work while two-handing as the button to execute it is also mapped to the parry with shields. That's a very obvious design oversight. It's also disappointing because it limits the potential of weapon arts significantly. Some of them are okay, but often they're just eclipsed by regular R1 swings. The longsword's weapon arts is essentially only useful for hitting stuff that's slightly above your standard swing arcs, and that's only really useful on one boss, the Curse-Rotted Greatwood. It's a shame because we're going from Bloodborne with the cool new trick weapons which had awesome transitionary attacks and really unique movesets, and we're just back at square one with the same system we've played through in Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2. It's all the same shit. So in conjunction with the new weapon arts, the MP bar is back from Demon Souls. I guess it's called FP this time around, but whatever. And there's a new Ashen Estus to go with it. I will say it right now. Ashen Estus is worthless unless you're doing a dedicated magic build, and like I said, magic is a shell of its former self. Since Ashen Estus is worthless, it's almost always better to just dump into your regular Estus. Which brings into another point. They just keep doing this weird stuff with the Estus, I don't get it. Dark Souls 1's Estus system was basically perfect, and they see fit to keep gutting it and making it harder and harder and harder for no reason. You got Dark Souls 2 shard system, but it's just, I don't understand it, I don't know. Otherwise, nothing's really changed. It's all the same shit you've seen before, except for the fact that the pace of combat is sped up. It's kinda as if they used the Bloodborne engine. This is something that you won't notice if you're playing on PC or Xbox One, or you never played Bloodborne. A lot of the enemy designs, the architecture, the sounds, they all feel ripped straight out of Bloodborne. From is fairly notorious for reusing assets like sound effects. I'm pretty sure the bell ringing from Demon Souls is still in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, but it's very apparent with Dark Souls 3 especially. The basic enemies you fight look like they're ripped out of Yarnum. They have that really lanky appearance. A lot of the character rigs are clearly reused from the other games. It wouldn't surprise me for a second if a lot of the enemies you encounter, like the corrupt guys that shoot that black shit out, were originally meant for Bloodborne, and I don't appreciate that. There are some concepts and ideas that just get reused. I find the darkened version of Firelink Shrine is kind of like a mindfuckery thing, but that's exactly what they did with the old workshop, which is the real version of the Hunter's Dream in Bloodborne. There's a lot of other really obvious elements as well. The Abyss Watcher's second phase feels exactly like Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower from the old Hunter's DLC, and that makes it all feel really lazy. This is a criticism that I actually think is more valid than people give it credit for. To me, it feels like From figured they could get away with it because a lot of people just won't have played Bloodborne compared to Dark Souls 2, since it's multi-platform and Bloodborne's a PS4 exclusive. A lot of the time in Dark Souls 3, I just had this overwhelming feeling that I'd seen this before in Bloodborne, or done this before in the various other games. The themes of a cycle just make it all routine. Haha, I get it. Another poison swamp. Oh, that's so funny. We've seen that so many times. Another grand castle. Oh, it's Anor Londo again. I played that in Dark Souls. I recognize that. I'm gonna consider this a weak piece of criticism, but it was kind of fundamental to my experience. Dark Souls 3's NPC questlines basically require a guide. There was stuff in Dark Souls 1, 2, Demon Souls that was kind of a little bit unintuitive, but you could mostly figure things out on your own. I didn't find that to be the case with Dark Souls 3. I play these games on full media blackout with no walkthroughs to have the discovery on my own. I firmly believe that that's the best and most enjoyable way to play them. Maybe occasionally going on some message boards for discussion, but never resorting to guides or wikis, at least in your first playthrough. I had some bad luck. In the catacombs when I was talking to Anri, a skeleton aggroed me and got stuck between her and the wall. At the time it didn't occur to me to quit out, so the skeleton damaged her enough that she turned hostile. So there was one quest line that was just gone. Then I completely missed out on Sigmire at the church when he's in the well. I still do not know where that well is or where to find Sigmire there. Then it all comes crumbling down because I didn't save Sigmire, like Grey Rat's doomed, and there's this chain of events that just doesn't happen because I missed one thing, and I don't like that. There's no way to know that, or have any indication that it's even possible that he could die going out for supplies in areas I've already cleared. Then there's just a lot of things like magic teachers have nothing to say. They never change their dialogue. In Demon Souls, way back when, Sage Freak and the other NPCs gave you insight into the world as you progressed via new dialogue. In Dark Souls, every character had their own missions and objectives, and after learning their magic, they would continue on with their unique quest. Once you get the various teachers in Dark Souls 3, they just sit in Firelink and say the same things over and over and over again. They will say something different when you get them a tome, but then after they've said their little shtick about the tome, they just go back to whatever they were originally saying, and they never talk about it again. I found that very disheartening, and I think very telling of From's current nature. Difficulty is kind of hard to judge in these games since there's a lot of transferable skill between these games. I would say that Dark Souls 3 is not as hard as Bloodborne, but there's a lot of stuff that is more on what I would consider bullshit or annoying rather than good game design. A lot of enemies in general just very unfun to fight because it's very easy to get ambushed or killed by them. Speaking of ambushes, Dark Souls 3 has a shitload of them, and I'm gonna go on a bit of a tirade here. Ambushes are something that work really well in low numbers. Ambushes by design are meant to catch you off guard. They're meant to be something that actually scares you and makes you panic. When you're expecting an ambush around every single fucking corner in Dark Souls 3, and most of the time you're correct that there is something there, it loses all value. You've got your shield up, you're on your guard. It lessens the impact of an ambush, but there's so fucking many of them. I hate ambushes the way they've become used in Dark Souls 3. Ambushes used to be a really small aspect of the level design, and it became this huge thing where they're everywhere, and every single time there's one more ambush, it just makes it worse all around. Back on topic, the hardest boss by far for me was Nameless King. He's optional. He's kind of like that super boss at the end of the game. After my playthrough, I was kind of just done with the game. I fought him a couple times but I never beat him, and I had no desire to grind attempts on him. I would say he's the hardest part of the game by quite a margin, but there's a lot of garbage in Dark Souls 3 that you need to wade through. Dark Souls 3 is a solid 20.5 hours for a guy who's half decent and experienced with these kind of games. One of the problems is that I actually got lost a few times, mainly because I kept running into dead ends and I found that very annoying. I spent a lot of time in the Undead Settlement because I was having trouble with the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, only to find out that that was a dead-end path and I was supposed to go another way. That was really annoying, and I found it quite disheartening. Same thing with the Cathedral of the Deep. I was excited to get to the next area after beating the Deacons of the Deep, only to find that that was the end of it. The series is kind of built on this idea of branching paths and things coming together and things coming around full circle and being interconnected, and it just isn't present. Basically have a T-junction followed by a line with two branches on it, and that's essentially what Dark Souls 3's world design looks like. It's very uninspired, and it's very disappointing. Nothing took me a lot of attempts in terms of difficulty. And towards the end, I did summon help because I was just fucking bored. Honestly, I was just fucking bored of the game. For a single playthrough, I enjoyed it for the most part, but at the same time, the whole game, I had this overwhelming feeling that I've played this before. Irithyll Dungeon desperately wants to be as memorable as the first level of Tower of Latria, but it falls flat because it just feels like a rehash. You got throwbacks that really have no place. There's Dark Wraiths for no real reason. There's a few Black Knights. You even go directly back to Anor Londo. It just came off as really uninspired and lazy and completely there for fan service. The series has always been built around exploring these new worlds, and Dark Souls 3 feels largely like a rehash. I found myself enjoying fights that most people hated. I liked fighting Yorm the Giant with the Storm Ruler as a cool throwback to Demon Souls. I liked being able to one-shot a dragon with a plunging attack. It was like dishing out poetic justice against every single dragon in the series. Finally. Other than that, I just felt everything was so uninspired, especially if you've played Bloodborne. You've got a magician that duplicates and shoots missiles at you. We've seen that numerous times before. We've got a couple of fights with big guy in armor. I just am so disappointed in Dark Souls 3. And it makes me so sad that this is how I feel. Because it could have been something great and amazing, and it's so lackluster. I don't think it's terrible, but it just needed to be better. The jump from Demon Souls to Dark Souls was fucking huge. The formula largely stayed the same, but it completely changed the way the world and the levels were structured, which made it feel completely different. Dark Souls 2 felt derivative because it maintained the status quo as well as just being on a horrendous engine. Bloodborne felt unique because it changed up the formula enough while still maintaining the good aspects, but it still wasn't perfect. Dark Souls 3 just doesn't do any of that. It's the most linear game in the series by a huge margin. Your only potential deviations are doing Dancer early, but even then, you're restricted from the rest of the bosses and you can't fight the princes early for no arbitrary reason. It really offers nothing fresh, and in my opinion, was just totally eclipsed in overall quality by Bloodborne. The more I think about it, the more I think that Demon Souls and Dark Souls were just lightning in a bottle. They channeled their inner Bob Ross and they just had some
happy accidents.
I often hear that the DLCs are the best part of these games. I will concede, Artorias of the Abyss and the Old Hunters were good DLC, but I won't be buying the Dark Souls 3 DLC. The ending left such a bitter taste in my mouth that I just have no desire to play Dark Souls 3 again. That's very atypical. I got hundreds if not thousands of hours in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, less time in Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, but I still did multiple playthroughs, and I am willing to go back and do some more Bloodborne. There's some stuff I still want to do in it. I own the Dark Souls 2 DLCs via the Scholar of the First Sin edition on PS4, and I've just never played them. I'm sure they're decent, as everyone raves about how much better the level design is to anything in the main game. I have no desire to play them, but I will eventually, largely because I believe Dark Souls 2 just to be fundamentally broken. Everything in Dark Souls 2 feels off. It's just an issue with the engine, as far as I'm concerned. Dark Souls 3 doesn't have the same problems as Dark Souls 2, but since I didn't enjoy it, the DLC will not fix anything from me. From what I've read and watched, the first DLC, Ashes of Ariandel, is basically a huge cash grab, with boring level design, a cheap boss fight that's a lazy multi-enemy encounter of 2 standard enemies, and a really horrible looking 3-phase final boss fight. I can't get behind multiple DLCs that are just cash grabs with not enough content to justify the price. Artorias was fairly reasonably priced at $15, and it was packed in with the PC version, so it was likely you didn't even pay for it. The Old Hunters had a good amount of content, but it still felt like it was expensive at $20 for what it was. The only way you can vote against cash-grabbing DLC and lazy game development is with your wallet, so I will be making my statement to From by not buying it. There are realistically two things I want for a sequel: bigger and better. I want the game to be more expansive, to give me more options, more content, more of everything. I want the game to be better, to fix the problems the original had and improve upon what it did well as well. I genuinely struggled in deciding whether or not to recommend Dark Souls 3. To me, Dark Souls 3 was a disappointment. I think that's largely because I let myself get hyped up for it, and if I hadn't played Bloodborne, I think I would have enjoyed it more, but I think that's also universally true with anyone who played Bloodborne and then played Dark Souls 3. It's the most linear Dark Souls game by a large margin, and it's also the smallest in scale. It's derivative from the other games in this series. It does some things new, but the entire time I had this overwhelming feeling that I've seen this before, I've done this already, this is just a rehash. There are a few things that I just straight up felt like they were ripped from Bloodborne, including one of the more interesting plot reveals like the Darkened Firelink Shrine. After 5 games in this style, and thousands of collective hours played, the cracks really start to show. When the game does nothing to fill in those cracks, and proceeds to make even more cracks and worsen the experience with the most linear level design in the series, lazy bosses and rehashed ideas, I just can't in good conscience recommend it. If you're a fan of the series, Dark Souls 3 is more of the same. If you're looking for a jumping off point, I think you'd be better off starting at Demon Souls or Dark Souls 1, and if you like those, move on to the others. I genuinely believe you should just play the Holy Trinity: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I really wish Dark Souls 3 was better. I really do. But it's not.
Nathan! Nathan! Get up, brother. We gotta go. We gotta go! Now!